What's up, guys? Shawnthebro here. So today we're going to be doing the episode on the fighting game camera. So this is going to be split into two parts, okay? Because the first one, you can see we're already zoomed in a lot more than we were. And it also goes off the midpoint of the two players as opposed to just one player. So you can actually see it will zoom in and zoom out to a max and min that we give it as we get farther away. But this part of the tutorial will not cover going off the screen and or like stopping the players from moving out of the bounds based on the camera's distance and all that stuff. It also won't go over panning the camera. So if both of these players were to move, it would not move with them. It would move to be the center of them, right? But it would not move with them if they were like right next to each other. Hopefully that makes sense. If not, it's cool because we'll be covering that in another episode. Next episode, we'll probably go over actually making multiplayer and making us be able to use two controllers and or the keyboard to control the two different players. This way we can actually test the other changes with the camera, and you'll see why that'll be important after that episode. So for now, let's get working on this. So I wanted to show you, I did not implement the camera in this map. So just realize what we're about to do will break maps where you don't add your new camera in. Okay, so just make sure you're aware of that. If you're having issues seeing your characters or something weird like that, you probably forgot to add the camera to that map you're using. So what we're going to do, we'll start with the code. If you go to your fighter template character, and if you're using the template character like we have been in the series, and if you haven't watched the other videos in the series and you're interested, I'll put a link to the iCard in the top right corner. There you go. So anyway, if you'd like to get started and get rid of all the junk in the template that kind of makes it follow the character around, right? So normally what was going on is the camera was following the first player around because a camera component was attached to the first player. This is all done within the C++ and header files of your template character or your base character. So if we go to the header file, you can see I have added some variables like can move. Don't worry, I'll be going over this in the next episode. I just had a little bit extra time. I started working on it. You don't need to implement any of the stuff that you see in here that I don't mention. It's for a later episode. I just added it in advance. So if you go down, scroll all the way down and all the way up actually. So let's start with this one. If you're at the top of your header file of your default character, you'll see that a uCamera component class and a uSpringArm component class were both created by default with the character. You can comment them out. You can get rid of them if you want, but in case anybody wants to keep this functionality for any reason, I went ahead and commented out because you never know, you might need it. And I just realized this window was a little too big, so there you go. I realized that you might want to keep these for whatever reason, maybe for a single player mode or like a wave defense mode, you know, where you're fighting off a bunch of thugs or something like that. So you can go ahead and comment it out for now. Make sure you scroll all the way down to the bottom where it says public and you have your constructor here. Right below it, you'll see force inline with your camera component and spring arm. Comment them out as well. Basically, these create camera components and things to attach to the camera that we don't want because we're going to make our own camera. And then if you go to fighter template character, your CPP, you can basically get rid of all the stuff that says camera here. So comment it out, delete it, whatever you want. But camera boom, side view camera component, comment all that stuff out in the constructor. There we go. And I think, nope, that's it. Okay. I thought wrong. My fault. So yeah, that should be everything. The stuff in the constructor and then the two spots in the header file. Up top, right after generated body, and down below right at the end. If you comment all that out, now essentially we won't have the camera spawning for when we place a character in the scene in Unreal, which is good, right? So if we go to our level, and actually let's go to, I put it on this one. If we go to our level, this camera won't be here. This is what we're going to add. But normally when you were over your character, they would have a camera component if you looked at it while you were playing. But they're not going to have that anymore because we're no longer spawning that. So instead what we're going to do is we're going to make a camera BP basically that we can drag in that uses the code logic that we have in our camera class. So, or not our code logic, our blueprint logic. So basically go to wherever, I believe I put it in blueprints, functional blueprints. Yep. So you can go ahead and make a new class. So new, add new blueprint class, and just type in camera. Camera actor you can use. Trying to see. There are a few others you can use. Like some people use the cine camera, which it's like cinematic camera. I don't know if you're supposed to say cine camera, but it's the cinematic camera. Okay. Some people use this. It's not necessary for what we're doing, I don't believe. Like, I've never actually used this for the type of camera we're trying to use, so I don't think it's necessary. This is more for cutscenes and stuff, so maybe for your character's entrances you might want to use this, but for now, just use a camera actor. Just use that, select it, and then it'll create your class. I called mine default camera, because, again, we are probably going to have multiple cameras throughout our fighting game tutorial, because we're going to have a camera for our entrance animations, a camera for perhaps our exit animations, like whoever won, whoever lost, anything like that. We might also have some cutscenes even, in which case we'd make a different camera. So I call it default camera. You can call it fight camera, whatever you want. When you're done, go ahead and go into that camera, and you'll have all your default stuff: begin play, on actor overlap, and tick. So we don't need on actor overlap, so I just had begin play and tick. Okay, so there's a few things here we need to do to basically set up the camera to work like what you saw on the screen. So the very first node is something I'm going to leave a special note about. We're going to take out this delay later, so don't necessarily worry about it. Delays are generally bad practice, and I normally wouldn't recommend it, but there's special things that come into place when you're creating new objects, and a bunch of new objects, when you're loading a scene or a level, that, you know, oh, you have to check if this is valid or if this is valid, and if one is off, then it can throw off your whole game. I decided to do a short delay to make sure everything was valid, and there is actually a genuine reason for it. So I'll get into that more in the next camera episode, and we'll actually fix it and remove it from a delay. But for now, we don't have anything in place. So if that's not making sense, or you don't know what I'm talking about, don't worry. If you're familiar with what I'm talking about, then you'll probably see why I don't want to add it into this episode. Either way, what we're going to do is we're going to add a delay. So it's just delay, this guy right here. And I just made it really small, 0.03. Because you don't want to see the delay. You don't want it to actually stop any logic that's going on. We're doing this so that all the characters can be valid before we try to use them. Okay, it's that simple. Again, we will fix this later, so don't worry about it. Just put it in there for now. Or if you know the issue that I'm trying to address, then go ahead and you can work on fixing it. But I think it's too much for this episode. So delay. This just, essentially, if you don't know what delay does, by the way, delay will enter this node, wait for the time that you give it, and then when the timer is up, it'll go on to the other logic. So it can be very useful, but it can be dangerous, and it can cause race conditions and things like that. So just be careful. Make sure you're using it correctly and as little as possible. For me, I more use it as a debugging tool, and a tool that I can use to skip problems that I know I'm going to have to fix later. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to set a player 1 and player 2 reference in here. Now, we could just use the game mode, cast to our game mode, and then use player 1 and player 2 from there, and that's fine. But we're going to use the references quite a bit in here. Only 2 times now, but we're going to also have to deal with the camera bounds and the panning later in another episode where we're going to use these again. So I'd recommend just making a reference in here we can easily select. So you can do get game mode, and then cast it to the game mode that we're currently using, default game mode BP. That's the one where we spawn our characters and set our players and all that stuff. From there, grab player 1, make sure it's valid. If it is, set our player 1 reference, and to make this, you just add a new variable, click on the little variable type, and you type in whatever type your character is. So for me, it's a fighter template character. And then you do object reference. So for player 1 and player 2, it's the same thing. So you do this, you say, if it's valid, set player 1, and then continue. Oh, player 2 from the game mode. If player 2 is valid, then set player 2 ref. That way we can use them down below. Again, you could skip this. I'd recommend it just because we're going to be using a lot, and you don't want to keep casting over and over again. Okay. Now, this is something that I'm doing on tick, okay? Because your camera constantly has to be updating. So I think this is one of the better things to be doing on tick as opposed to event-based. So what we want to do here is we essentially want to do some logic that allows us to get in between the two characters, right? So we can see both of them on the screen. And we don't want to just focus on one character and put him in the center. So I'm going to go over the logic, but I think this will make pretty good sense when we're looking at it. So if you go into tick, I get player 1 and player 2 reference, which we just set up above. These guys right here. I make sure that they're both valid. Is valid, so just drag off type is valid. This one right here with the F for function. This guy. Check is valid, and then you can drag off of these and type and boolean, and you'll get this box, which is this thing that they're in right now. And what this does is it makes sure both of these results are true. And if they're not true, if either one of them is false, then this result will be false. If they're both true, this will be true. So we do a branch. Okay, just type in branch. If it's true, if both of these are valid, then we go and do our logic. And our logic is kind of intense here, but not really. Okay, it's pretty simple when we actually look at it. It takes a bit, especially if you've never done it before, to actually think about kind of what goes into getting the center ground between your characters and things like that. So we get the actor location of player 1 ref and player 2 ref. We need to know where they both are. We're also going to get the actor location of our camera, so you can leave it empty because this is the camera. This is default camera. So the actor location of self is the actor location of the camera. Now, we're going to break the vector. So drag off of this, type break vector. And what this does is it gives you access to the X, Y, and Z values of the actor location. So this is important because what we're doing here is we're allowing the camera to grab a specific component because we might not want to change all of the things with the location. So for example, and it'll depend on the way your models are facing, it'll depend on the way your scene is facing. So you can always look at this compass down here, or whatever you want to call this thing, in the bottom left-hand corner. So this will tell you your X, Y, and Z axes. They're not necessarily what you would expect them to be, like X horizontal, Y vertical, Z depth. They're not always like that. It depends. The template also sets you up for failure by not making it that way, so it doesn't make it easy all the time. But you can use this as a guide. We want to determine what values we want to change, okay? What values we want to use the zoom in, zoom out, and camera positioning logic to. So if you see, we don't want X, right? Because X is depth. Well, we're always going to be on the same depth. We always should be. Like, I know there's this bug, and technically I set up some new stuff for another episode, so I can't actually use these guys. But technically, just as a general example, I know there's an issue where if you jump on the opponent's head, oh, you go flying backward. That's fine, right? That's just a bug. We'll fix that later. But in terms of the actual fighting game, you're never going to have someone behind the character. Now, if you're doing like a Tekken style, you actually can have that, right? They can actually go into the background or foreground, and that's fine, in which case you will want to use your X value here. But for this is strictly like a 2.5D fighter. We're going to be using Y, which is horizontal, and Z, which is height. So I'm going to go back, so go ahead, let me say this so you can play around with it before we get too far. Drag your default camera into the scene. Now, make sure, I don't want to have two, but once you drag it in, then it'll show you what your camera's looking at right here. And you can go ahead and play around with things if you want in here. You don't really need to. You can make sure that it's auto-activated because since you no longer have a camera attached to your player, you'll want to attach it to somebody, okay? Because since we're not spawning it from some sort of like parent thing and we just drag it into the scene, I would do auto player activation here in the details panel under, auto player activation. Auto activate for player, and I did player 0, which is the first one. You could do it for whoever. Again, player 0 is default, right? So I would recommend doing this because if you don't do this, then it won't be activated, which means it won't work. we will set it up to where it actually activates regardless of the players you have, regardless of a certain player later. Again, in the next camera episode, there's a very specific reason I'm not doing it right now. Not necessarily worth getting into, but you can just auto-activate it here. It should be good. If you have any issues with it not showing up, just look around here, make sure you have auto-activate on the camera component and things like that. Okay. So once you've dragged it into the scene, dragged, I think it's dragged. Once you've dragged it into the scene, I'm going to go back to my main menu level. So, just a quick other example. So you see that we are on the same X value. So we don't need to do any sort of zooming with that. If you're on Tekken and you could walk foreground, background, then great. Then go ahead and do that. But otherwise, we just want to deal, you see it, the camera actually raises when I'm in the air as well now. That's the Z, and then it actually moving when I move from left to right is the X, or excuse me, the Y, okay? So go back to your camera. So that's why I have Y and Z, and I have not grabbed X out of here. Now Y and Z do the same thing, I just change the values up to whatever looks better. So your Y value, okay? Your Y value is our horizontal. This is determining, we're gonna add them together and then divide by a value. I'm dividing by 2 because that's getting basically the average, if you will, right? It's adding this guy's Y and this guy's Y and then dividing by 2 to get the average. You could change this. You could make it 1.5 or something like that, and I'll show you what it does. So you see, now it's just off center. Now you could want this depending on your zoom level, like, oh, maybe favor the left side or the right side, and you could also do it the other way. Like for me, actually, because of my models, I think it should be more of like a 2.1 even. Yeah, I think that actually looks better than the 2, because now they look like they're at the exact same edges of the screen. But yeah, you can play around with the numbers quite a bit, okay? And that'll be really useful when working with your camera. It's just seeing it, seeing how it works and testing it. But that's what that does. That's essentially all it does. So it looks kind of complicated, but you're literally adding your Y values together and then essentially dividing to get almost an average. It's not going to necessarily be perfect because, and the reason I'm doing 2.1, I'll show you one more time. So there is more character to my left than there is to the right because the center of this guy is actually like over here. So by getting his actor location, it's getting it like in his chest. It gets the center of the character when actor location is returned. So it's getting it over here, which is why if I do the actual center, then player 1, his foot is kind of off the screen. So that's why you kind of have to play around with it. Technically, the real fix would be to move the character's center to his actual center, but, you know, it's fine. Just as long as you're aware of that. And I do the same thing with Z, right? So we add these together, and I divide by 1.7 because I didn't want it to go to favor too high in the air. I still want to be able to see the person on the ground. We could do a zoom out when they jump if you'd rather. That way you could see them the whole time. Either way, it's, again, all preference. I'm just showing you how it works. Basically, add your values together of any of the directions that you want to have scale, right? You want to have actually go to the middle or the midpoint of, and then divide by a value close to the amount of players you have. For a fighting game, you always have 2. So you basically are getting an average. That's what all this is doing. I know it's a long explanation, but I think it's important because you're going to have to change these numbers on your own to be able to figure out a camera that you like. Okay, now that we've got that under control, another thing, make sure when you're adding these, actually it won't matter for this. It's for the scaling. My fault. So you're good. Lastly, what we're going to do is we're going to make our vector. Okay, so you drag off you just right click and do make vector. Like this, it's this guy right here. Then you put all the new coordinates in. So we changed our Y, we changed our Z, so we set Z to be the Z of the make vector, Y to be the Y of the make vector. For the ones we don't change, you just use the camera's location. So we didn't change X, so that's why we get the actor location of our camera. We get the X, and we put it into the make vector X. That's your new position. So we want to set the actor's location, this is the camera's position, to this new location. Got it? I think that part is pretty easy once you understand the math that's actually here. And then all we got to do is actually set the zoom level. So the zoom level, and I'll go over it again, is, okay, we have it at this very specific value that we want, and this looks great, but I want to be able to walk away at least a bit. Even if I do want to block the character, like if I wanted to block them there, I still want them to be able to walk away a bit. And if you don't, then go ahead and skip this part. But if you do want to have the camera zoom in or zoom out a bit, then here's how we do that. Get our player 1 and player 2 refs again, get their active locations again, and break their vector again. Now, since we've done that, what you're going to do is we're going to grab the value that we want to use. So for the height, I did not do any sort of zooming in or zooming out. I just did it based on distance, horizontal distance. So I grab my y-axes, I subtract them. So make sure when you're subtracting these, you have a positive value. Now, if you don't have a positive value, it's cool. You can use the absolute value here, which is what I'm doing as a safe, as like a safety check. But if you, for whatever reason, if you don't want to use this absolute value node, make sure that these are positive. Otherwise, it'll flip your camera. It'll look really ugly because you have a negative field of view. Not good, okay? So anyway, either make sure these are positive or make sure you use this absolute value node. But what this is doing is you're subtracting the coordinates from each other, so player 1 minus player 2. And you're getting a result that it's telling you basically, okay, the distance between these characters is this far, so I should zoom out. I need to be able to zoom out to see both of them. And then you multiply it by this value because, I mean, you don't have to, and I'll show you what happens. So this is what happens if you just do the difference. Nothing, right? Because you're not actually multiplying by anything. So you get the distance, and that's it. You just have your value, so you don't have a difference in between to determine, oh, so this is the value I want to have. This is the level of zoom I should have. So you can change this all you want, and you'll see it changes. So if I make it a really high number, like 0.5, you'll see it changes the threshold in the distance I have to be to actually be able to zoom in or zoom out. So if I make it as high as 0.5, I have to be all the way up next to the character for this to actually work. So if it was 0, like I had before, technically I'd have to go like all the way back here and never actually reach it to zoom in or zoom out. You could make it a much more reasonable number, like 0.15. And when you do this, now you see I'm like halfway zoomed. It zooms in. It's a little bit more lenient, right? You don't have to be right up against them to get the full zoom, but you also don't have to be too far to get the full distance zoom, like the really far away zoom. I found 0.1 was a good number. You could do it even 0.05 would probably look pretty good. Again, it all depends on what you're looking for anyway. For me, I think 0.1 is the best, but we'll try this last one. So yeah, here I'm already I have to go off the screen to actually trigger the zoom out. So for me, 0.1. Again, play around with that number. Absolute value. That's what I was talking about before. That way you don't get a negative value to clamp to. That way you don't get 0 clamping at all. That way you can actually set your field of view. It's just a chain of things, right? But it's important. So this clamp. So if you drag off your absolute value and type clamp, clamp float right here. What this does is it gives you a min and a maximum value that your camera can zoom to. So if you change these values in here, and I made 60 and 85, you can get there by printing a string off of this and seeing what your result is if you wanted. You don't have to do this. You can just guess. Just play around with it. But if you were to do, and whoops, not the duration. Here you go. If you were to do this, it would show you exactly what I'm talking about. So see, I'm at 50 distance right now. So as I move closer, I'm at all the way up to 8. And as I move farther away, I get all the way to like 168. So basically, this clamp determines what values you want this field of view to be set for. So if we change these numbers, like if I make this min 30, then when we build this, now you see we're super zoomed in because we're less than 60, so it's not clamping it. So we can go over here and kiss our opponent, basically. And we get the kiss cam here. And we don't want that. Well, maybe you want that. I don't want that for this game. Now, this gives you a lot more freedom. So you can see really how close you want to zoom in or how far you want to zoom out. Because obviously, I'll change this back, and I can make this 120, and you can zoom out really far. I don't even know how big this is going to be, but it's going to be pretty far. So yeah, you can see all the way out here. Again, maybe that's something you want. Great. Play around with the numbers, see what you want. I chose 60 and 80 because I thought they looked the best. But these determine your zoom levels. So they determine how close you can get and how far away you can get from your stage. Lastly, after you set your actor location from the part before, this is where we were setting their midpoint and all that, all the way over here, follow it to this, type right click, type set field of view, camera component. It'll give you these two things, so I'm going to delete this. Or you can actually do camera component. Oh no, they got rid of that, I guess. Or maybe it's a different way to do it. You used to be able to just type in get camera component. Oh yeah, right here. It's all the way at the bottom. Get camera component. And then you could drag off of that and do set field of view. But either way, if you just type set field of view and it has camera component in parentheses, you're good to go. And just drag the clamped value result into the in field of view, and you're good to go. You now have a camera that if you brought it into the scene earlier, like I said, you will be able to see your characters chilling at the value you have. You'll be able to see it zoom out, zoom in, and you'll be able to do all your normal stuff. Since we have the absolute value, it will also work with zooming out, zooming in on opposite sides if player 1 is on the opposite side. And the midpoint will always work since we're doing an average. It doesn't matter if it's positive or negative. So you don't have to worry about that. So there you go, guys. So we have a height and horizontal, midpoint, and zooming thingy camera. That's the word for it. So I think that's it for today's episode. And it was kind of a longer one. That's why I didn't want to get into the blocking the characters from leaving the camera and the panning of the actual camera when we have two players moving. But we will get into that later. Feel free to play around with it, or let me know some of the camera designs that you really like. Like, oh, maybe I had them larger, but I clamped it at these values. Like, that stuff's good to know. And maybe other people will see that and be like, yeah, I should use those values. So anyway, guys, thanks for watching this video. Hope you enjoyed this episode of the Fighting Game tutorial where we go over the fighting game camera. In the next episode, we're going to go over controlling two players with two different input devices, like two different Xbox controllers. And we're also going to go over two inputs on the keyboard, because that way we can have two people playing on one keyboard, or if you don't have controllers to plug in, then you can still test multiplayer just with one device. And yeah, guys, that's about it. So let me know what you think. If you need any assistance or just want to join a wonderful community of people also working on fighting games and all sorts of different stuff, just a wonderful community, there's a Discord link in the description, which will help you join our community of 78 members. And yeah, we can all share our work and it'll be a fun time, and I can help you with any issues you have, and you can request ideas for videos and things like that. If not, it's totally cool. You can do it in the comment section down below, but I just think it's way easier to use the Discord anyway. Alright, lastly, guys, just want to say thank you for everyone who's been coming over from YouTube to Twitch. If you're interested in watching me play and do something other than this behind the screen programming talk, then you can come watch me play some stuff on Twitch at Shawnthebro27. Wednesdays we play Dark Souls. Friday we play Resident Evil. Tuesdays and Saturdays we do multiplayer games with our friends. So it's a fun time, and I figured I'd love to see some of you there. So if you're interested in coming by, there you go. Link's also in the description if you just want to follow that. But thanks, guys, for everything. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.